All 5 Shades of Crazy. Short story. She was all 5 shades of crazy, but I didn't know that when I bought her a sloppy-faced tequila mirage with a neat slice of icy tangerine and pointed gallantly at the poster of James Dean hanging crooked on the wall. People say I used to look a bit like him, I said, trying to be aloof. Must have been a long time ago, she said, unsmiling. I agreed that the years had grown waxy and my leather attire was barely black and heroic any longer, such as the march of safe careers. She did, however, give it a second consideration, looked me over and said, "What is it you do again?" "A poet," I said, "when I'm not selling stationery." She thought it over for a minute, shrugged her shoulders to herself and decided that would do. "Let's get out of here," she suggested. Her name, I had perused, was Multiple Edie. Some people called her Edie Edie, or even Edie Edie Edie. But when they grew weary of that, they added the multiple, by which she was entirely content. She was dark blonde and forthright, and was wearing a Surrender Monkeys t-shirt underneath her endearing earrings. It came as a surprise in that case, because the Surrender Monkeys were due on stage in less than half an hour, and I had supposed she was completely dedicated. I had told her, in fact, that I knew the bass player, but she seemed strangely unmoved. I looked at the empty fixtures, looked at her, noted the rowdy crowd in the corner and said, "Yeah, okay, let's go." Thus we stumbled onto the night-filled streets. "Do you have a car?" she said. "No," I said. "It's at the auto shop." "I'll have to take mine then," she said, and turned and strode relentless across the brazen drag. It was a plastic night of molten airs. Red dust from the north hung in the gloating half-light. The town was unusually busy for a Wednesday eve. I followed, curious and betaken by her immediacy. She had the hips of a farm girl, but a drastic manner that made her cosmopolitanly sullen. She gave very little away. I noticed, however, that her vocabulary included the word consternation, which I took as a sure sign of a modern disposition. She didn't seem like the type of girl who would drive an Austin Healey Sprite, but we arrived at one just in time for her to tell me she had lost her keys. "Do you know how to break in?" she asked. I said it can't be too hard, and together we managed to jemmy the passenger door and negotiate the locking device so we could drive it away. She took the wheel. I adjusted the side mirror. The tyres squealed and we headed out on the broad highway, leaving Elegant Ridge behind. For reasons about which I am still unsure, it was 20 minutes or more, zipping along at 125, before it occurred to me to say, "This is your car, isn't it?" She glanced in the rear view. "Not really," she said. "Not really? Whose is it then?" I wondered. With no reduction in her thunder, she leant over in a precipitous manner, unchecked the glove box, dragged out some papers, held them to the dashboard light and said, "Ellen Grady." "Who's Ellen Grady?" I had to ask. She looked again at what the papers revealed. "A surveyor," she said. "My God," I said, "we've stolen a car." "Borrowed," she said. "I'll put it back." This was cold comfort, but the starry breach above us was too velvety and vast, and the open highway said both "too late" and "take me to adventure." I suspected, though, that Ellen Grady would probably be unimpressed. Then more miles of the warm darkness traversed us by before I had to ask, "Where are we going?" "We'll be there soon," she said. An Austin Healey Sprite, of course, gobbles up country highways in a sleek red Salute, never greasy. It is a clean machine. A simple toggle on the throttle and the tight-thighed engine growls like a wildcat. The hood was down and the weight of the atmosphere turned our hair on 2 wispy flags of freedom. There is something about the open road that grows addictive. Multiple Edie just looked ahead. It was like she was counting the white lines. She called me James Dean and invited me into her movie. Nothing else made sense. She had a PhD in attitude and was in no hurry to pay off her student loan. I was soothed by her nonchalance all the same. A big country town is a rare place to find intrigue. We drove off the bitumen, deep into the sandy tracks, zoomed along a single-laned line across the floodplain, and very soon spun around on a tiny axis into the gateway of a white farmhouse, sleepy in the black array of the moment. Edie jumped out, slammed the door. "Around the back," she directed, and I followed her again along the garden path under a sweet-scented pergola on the back porch of the aforesaid house, also white among the blackness. Edie knew the way. She bent down, collected the key from under the mat, and we made our way inside. "This is your house, then?" I was asking. "Not really," she said. "Not really?" "I used to be," she said, and flicked on the light and made her way through the dining room to where a flash computer stood. She gave it a sudden rev and the blue screen kicked into an uncluttered desktop projection. She quickly went to the keyboard and worked away. I was slow because of her haste. That at least is all I can suppose. She was well inside that cyberspace before I was also asking, "What do you mean it used to be?" She ignored me. "Because," I continued, "we've already stolen a car, and as for breaking and entering, Eventually she looked up. "Listen, James Dean," she said, eyeing at me crooked. "The night is young." It was emphatic. I knew it to be too true. It was hardly 1 a.m. The great wheel of the constellations wouldn't poke Sirius into the eastern verge for hours. Certainly our predicament had me wide awake. My motivations were purple, and I took it that she had just acknowledged them to be so. So I backed off. I looked around. It was an ordinary sort of home, tastefully singlish, with no intrusion of either pets or little children. "Tell me a poem, James Dean," she then said, her eyes busy searching files in a labyrinth of password-protected avenues. At first I couldn't find one, but then cleared my throat and summoned up a verse or two, although not entirely germane to the context. I had once wooed an unhappy woman from the eastern pastures with it nonetheless, so it was worth a try. "Okay," I said, beginning. "She sleeps with hair undone, eyelids 2 purple flowers. But does she dream? The darkness beyond the stars in her bedroom eyes sing Om Shanti Shanti. I try to forget her, but even the young ryegrass whispers her name." I have considered adding the direction "a long silence" at the end of my poems, because when I recite them there is inevitably a long silence. There was a long silence. "Nice," she said blankly, just as she downloaded her digital winnings onto a bright pink electric stick. Then the poetic interlude, "nice," was abruptly ended as she turned and said in her announcement voice, "Let's go." We went. The Austin Healey Sprite made time. Rather than turning back into town, however, we headed across the floodplain proper, ripping up the traction, smashing local boundaries and racing towards the river bend among the coffee scrub and the ghost gums that slurp on subterranean waters. There was still exhilaration. It was kind of her to call me James Dean when the star himself was taken at such a tender age. The back roads were deserted and rustic, but I can imagine a cinematographic urgency like 2 noble strangers thrust into an unwitting saga. Every man wants his life to be a movie, particularly on a lonesome Wednesday night watching a local rock quartet in a bar in Elegant Ridge. "I only work part-time in stationery," I explained at one point. "Yeah, I'm so glad," she said, sincerely. By which stage we made it to the riverside track and rolled along, through a metal gateway across a rickety bridge, over the causeway wall, and reaching a siding constructed of cream brick, solid and official-looking. When we got out of the car, she made me look into the dark waters, and I could see a mass of squirming biology there, splashing and desperate. "What is it?" I asked. She looked over with me. The river was off in the distance. I realised we were on a long lagoon, and there were dam walls and a pump house and a wire fence and warning signs. "Fingerlings," she said. "Millions of them. Macquaria ambiguia." My realisation took greater shape. We're at a fish farm. But why had she brought me to this rare juncture? "Nice," I said. If she could say it, so could I. "Follow me," she said. At the cream brick siding, she tapped in a 9-digit code and the pump house door opened wide. There was a control room and the lights came on. Multiple Edie took her bright pink stick from her pocket and immediately knew the computer port to which it needed to be attached. "People think that fish are stupid and senseless," she told me just then. "But in fact, some of them are very smart. The Macquaria ambiguia, for instance, can distinguish spawning temperatures down to 1/10 of a degree and can recognise their relatives in turbid waters. Did you know that?" "I did not know that," I admitted. "Do you eat fish?" she asked, suspicious. Not really," I said. Once more, if she could say it, so could I. She looked at me with slender daggers. "Well, you know, Good Friday maybe," I said, limply, explaining. She paused but decided it was near enough. Without elaboration, though, she next twiddled on a dial or two and, checking gauges, typed in another code, thus stored upon the bright pink stick. Satisfied by the settings, she reached over and hit the big red button, the one saying quite clearly, "Do not touch." Then we listened. There was the rushing of water, there was the cranking of heavy gates, there was a rich gurgling of piscatorial liberation, and a couple of electronic thuds before numerous dials went into the flutters. "Come on," she said, and led me back into the darkness. Looking into the waters, the bubbling mass was gone. The whole biology was subsiding. The water noises echoed into the nearby forests. It slowly came to pass. "What have you done?" I asked. "They're free," she said. "What are? The fish?" "Free to roam the river's long meander," she exulted. The river, in fact, did meander, long and curly, and went on past the moment that it meets the Darling, a broad, swampy waterway that makes its presence across the barren sands. I knew it to be already full of carp and belly perch and yabbies. "Well, you let them go?" I said, incredulous. "Free to flail in cold-blooded splendour across the muddy banks," she continued. "My God," I said, realising. We stood in a blank hole of further communication, and all I could do was listen to the gurgles with her and know that several million fingerlings were just then being washed on towards the South Australian border. Multiple Edie had her way. It became obvious that she was fond of fish and identified with their aquatic playgrounds. I was mistaken, though, in surmising that I had got myself entangled with some pedestrian ecology nut intent to undermine the fishing man's habitat of profit. I might have known it would not be that easy. There were insect symphonies. Furtive fireflies facilitated the vampiric curse of the wild mosquito. The stars had stared down with everlasting indifference at our misdemeanour. In a while we hit the road again. It wasn't until we pulled up into a motel at Ivy's Rump a long while later that I summoned up the curiosity to quiz her with any determination. "But why?" I had to wonder as we walked in. She started giving me all that wonder fish nonsense again. We booked into a room together and she poured us a drink from the bar fridge. I had to insist in the end. You know, I said, I think there's more to it than that. Like what? She said. She settled on the bed and pretended that there wasn't a conundrum. I don't know. Like, whose house was that we went to? And what was with the fingerlings? Just a few of the questions I think you should answer, don't you? This was in my slightly assertive voice. I sipped on the rum and cola and waited for a straight reply. First we steal the car, I say, and then we break into a house and we borrowed a car, she said. We didn't exactly break into a house. No, but you broke into the computer and you stole the codes for the fish farm, and by this time we had taken the vehicle on a few 100 miles of red spread together. It was probably 5 a.m. and the stationery salesman in me wanted everything filed away. She took off her endearing earrings. All right, she said. I suppose you deserve some answers. That's right, I said. I do. With an impersonal explication, she started notching the buttons of my shirt, presumably recompense for my long bewilderment, and speaking softly, speaking fast, gave it to me unadorned. It turned out, you see, that multiple Edie had once lived a life of charm, and in one of her many-personed lifetimes, after travelling down from Sydney, had inadvertently married a fish farmer, a cruel and smelly man. The road going was to his house, and the road coming was to his fish farm, and the night had been a warm breeze of emotional rejuvenation, such that her scaly husband might never know. Revenge, she told me, has an absolutely aphrodisiacal hold upon her own betrayal. Husband? At this point I felt jerky. For some reason I had a vision of Alan Grady going back to find his Austin Healey Sprite missing from the car park. I went to say, you wait until we book into a motel room together before you tell me you've got a husband. But before I could reach any pitch of indignation, however feigned, a sudden pall of black muslin fell from my brain with a dumb thump and quickly darkened the living gaze. The rum and cola fell from my fingers. I slumped onto the bed. It was suddenly a dark blur and the deep night came crashing in. I might have also said, my God, we've sabotaged your husband's fish farm, at which she would most likely have scoffed, thinking me dramatic, and rolled her pupils, saying, sabotaged. Does anyone really know what that means? But all of this too was abruptly interrupted with an involuntary lurch into a comatose nothingness at last. I woke up mid-morning. I was as naked as a nodule, as flat as a frisbee, tied to the posts, and the maid, a dour Scottish lady working shifts because of the price of triticale, wanted to change the sheets. I was groggy, but it was immediately clear to me that she wasn't going to extend me even so much as a bee's dick of sympathetic motherhood. She untied my hands and said she'd be back with a vacuum cleaner in a minute, which I took as a type of threat. Needless to say, my crazy acquaintance was nowhere to be seen. There was a note beside the bed. Dear James Dean, I had to put the car back. I hope you get a few poems out of this. Edie, Edie, Edie. As I say, all 5 shades of crazy. I'd missed the Surrender Monkeys singing their greatest hits. The dark road, spiked with white lines, reached from one side of humiliation to the next. My purple passion sagged with the obviousness of folly. The real question was, just how many Edies in that multiple were there? Had anyone ever made a count? A few bangs of knockout drops hastens her getaway. Vindictive vixens dwell in opportune occasions. It was unclear exactly what I had to do with it, except that, for that one night, Edie wanted to be a Hollywood muse and needed a scribe of whatever pretensions to unloose her inner daring. I felt superfluous, though, and couldn't compose a single verse before the Scottish maid returned. Sore and unamused, I looked back upon the brief encounter unsure of what tracks we had traversed in the stolen red sports car of multiple Edie's dreams. It didn't work anyway. Whatever plan she had for me died an early death. James Dean sped to his demise in an ill-timed sideways manoeuvre on Route 41, heading north to Fresco in late September of 1955. He was a road demon and pushed his machine beyond its proper limits. He found auto racing a source of existential youth. His eternity took the form of monochrome posters on bar walls throughout the Western world. His jacket never frayed after that. It was the last time I would tell anyone that I used to look a bit like him. Back in Elegant Ridge, the following day I looked up Alan Grady, surveyor, in the telephone book, just to make sure that at least that call was real and not a delusion of someone's celluloid. Then I decided to have fish for dinner, even though it wasn't Good Friday, and retire uninspired for a while into the safe mode of pens and ring-back folders amidst the splendid sanity that is stationery sales again.